Hare Krishna. Welcome back, everyone, to our Bhagavad Gita as it is live stream via the 1972 Mac Deluxe Edition. Today we're doing chapter 6, verse 11 through 15, which is technically, 5 verses? 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 5 verses. But actually it's more like 3 because 4 of them are lumped together. 2 and 2 and 1. As you'll see in this book, if you're reading along with me. Now, in the other edition Gitas, that they may be lumped a little differently. I've noticed that happens sometimes. But regardless, it's 11 through 15. All right, join me if you like or not. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. And it really does sound better when you do it correctly. All right, verse 11 and 12. To practice yoga, one should go to a secluded place and should lay kusha grass on the ground and then cover it with a deer skin and a soft cloth. The seat should neither be too high nor too low and should be situated in a sacred place. The yogi should then sit on it very firmly and should practice yoga by controlling the mind and the senses, purifying the heart, and fixing the mind on one point. Now, first thing I'm noticing now for how long these 2 verses are. So first of all, it's 2 verses. They're lumped together. And even if they weren't lumped together, these seem like kind of long verses. The purport is pretty small, which would match my initial intuition reacting to these verses that for our purposes as Kali Yuga mlechas who are doing our best to follow people like Srila Prabhupada who are giving us the bona fide and relevant practice of this Bhagavad Gita in our times. All these particular details in these 2 verses and what's coming up later are not particularly relevant for us. Doesn't mean Krishna's wrong or anything. You can still, if you can find a deer skin and, kusha grass, go for it. For most of us, it's just not practical or feasible at all. Now, that being said, if you do still really love the idea of doing this kind of yoga, you totally can. And it shouldn't be too hard to see the principle behind it. And what's more important or less important within these particular instructions. So it's kusha grass on the ground, then deer skin, then a soft cloth. So what is happening there? It's something rough, then something less rough, then something even less rough, smoother to smoother, so that it's comfortable to sit on. And then Krishna says next, not too high or not too low. So what's the principle here? Sit comfortably. Find a place where you can be alone and preferably in a sacred place. Prabhupada is going to tell us in the purport that means Dham, the holy Dham, a place of pilgrimage. So find a very sanctified, sacred place. Be alone where you can be alone and sit comfortably. And then do yoga. If you can follow all those principles, but you're on, tiger skin instead of deer skin, or if you're on a plastic like yoga mat instead of kusha grass or whatever, you're fine, bro or sis. Don't worry about it. This falls within the realm of details. These sorts of things are details. They are not important to the principles of a yoga practice. I think also worth noting, Prabhupada uses the word should in the English translation, and there's nothing like that in the Sanskrit. Now, part of that is just how English works. You need to do some kind of verb, otherwise it won't be English. So if you don't do should, it'd be to practice yoga, go to a secluded place and lay kusa grass on the ground. I guess it does work. But, Prabhupada could have chosen one may go to a secluded place and may lay kusa grass, but you can't say that. It has to be stronger than that because this is direct instruction from the Lord. I just think it's interesting that it's mostly just a language difference between Sanskrit and English, and a cultural difference too. To get the same feeling this has in Sanskrit into English, you have to use the word should or must or need to, something like that, which maybe sounds a little bit too overbearing to us. Anyway, once again, I'm not judging the translation. I'm just finding interesting things to ponder. Most of us are not going to be following this instruction anyway. Most of us, whether you're veteran devotee disciples or not, are going to be maybe interested in the principles underneath this verse, but the actual details you're just going to skip over. Most of us do not have deer skin, cannot easily get it. Even if you're living in a place with a lot of deer, to actually get a deer skin, you're going to have to either kill it and make it yourself, which is not a devotee thing to do, or go buy it from someone else. And how common is that to save deer skin? In America, for instance, I don't think it's that common to have deer skin. If you kill a deer, I mean, you'll probably want to save the whole thing, go to a taxidermy guy, and save the whole trophy. Or maybe you'll save just the head and then the rest of it, I don't know. I don't know what happens. I'm not in that market. But anyway. So once again, to restate, the principle of these two verses is that we should practice yoga by controlling the mind and senses, and now one level more in detail is to fix consciousness on one point, and then one more level of detail, sit on a seat that is not high nor too low, and then one more level into a particular detail. So when I say one more level, it means one more thing that matters less, one thing that is less important. I may get the order wrong, but actually, so let's because the least important is the kusa grass and deer skin. The most important is controlling the mind and senses. Just after that, it's how do you control the mind and senses? In particular, just fix it on a single point. That doesn't mean it's the only way to do that. You could fix it on 3 points. Whatever. The principle, keep your eye on the prize. The prize is controlling the mind and senses. However you do it, that's great. One path that is recommended here is by fixing consciousness on one point. And a great way to do that is to be alone, to be in a quiet, secluded place. What kind of quiet, secluded place? A sacred or sanctified place. And what should your body do? It should be sitting down. How should it be sitting down? On a seat that's not too high, not too low. You should be comfortable. You should be sitting in such a way that you can comfortably sit for hours and you're not getting disturbed by your physical body. So what is too high or too low will vary person to person. So you have to use your own intelligence to see what is too high or too low for you. I'm not very flexible, especially sitting down, cross-legged sort of thing. So my seat will be a little bit higher than a lot of other people so that I'm not worried about, it hurts and this and that. And what should you be seated on? That's the least important thing. Krishna says, kusha grass, deerskin, and a soft cloth on top. But even if you're using a yoga mat, it's still, I would still recommend myself and others to follow this layered advice. So you have a hard surface on the bottom, then slightly less hard, and on the very top you have a nice and soft cloth. That will be the most comfortable while also providing the most support for your spine, pelvis, and so on. Now, what is the single point for us to focus our consciousness on? Well, it is simply chanting the holy names of the Lord. And that's what Prabhupada will state explicitly in the verse. And he quotes the famous verse, Hare Nama, Hare Nama, Hare Namaiva, Hare Namaiva, Kevalam Kalau Nasti Eva Nasti Eva Nasti Eva Gatir Anyata. In this age of quarrel and hypocrisy, the only means of deliverance is chanting the holy name of the Lord. There is no other way, there is no other way, there is no other way. Now, he says here, this is from the Burhan Naradiya Purana, but this is, for most of us, this is more famously found in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, I'm pretty sure. Anyway, it's a very famous verse. And for more details, we're just going to go to the next two verses, verse 13 and 14. Okay, verse 13 and 14. One should hold one's body, neck, and head erect in a straight line and stare steadily at the tip of the nose. Thus, with an unagitated, subdued mind, devoid of fear, completely free from sex life, one should meditate upon me within the heart and make me the ultimate goal of life. Unquote. So, bang, bang. We got the very next verse. We learn what Krishna was hinting at when he said, focus the mind on one point. What is that one point? Mat. Krishna uses the word mat, which means me. Specifically, it's mat padaha. Pada means super, so mat padaha. I am the super goal. Myself being transcendental. These are just different ways to translate mat padaha. Prabhupada literally translates it as unto me, ultimate goal. Mat, unto me, padaha, ultimate goal. So one more level of practical details in this verse is that we should stand however we're sitting on kusha grass or in a secluded place or not, we should stand in erect posture. But once again, that's not the most important principle. So if you're in a non-erect posture, but you are successfully controlling your mind and senses on a single point, that's great. You have done nothing wrong. It's very important to understand that when you focus on the most important principles and you mess up some of the details, that's not just okay. That's probably actually much better than what what most of people are doing is they're getting all the details that don't matter perfectly, and they've completely lost the principles. Not completely, but that's the common thing to do. And it's not something I'm blaming anyone for, because it's natural and easy to do. It's explicit, detailed instructions are the easiest to follow correctly. It won't be even like the kusha grass and deerskin. Like that is not an easy one to follow. But if you just focus on it, it's not that hard. You'll pay more in shipping and handling or something. But if you just say, okay, I'm just going to do this one perfectly, you can. And then as soon as you do that, you think, oh, look, I followed the Supreme Lord perfectly. And you start getting a big head over nothing. And then you start following all the other details perfectly. Oh, now I'm even more perfect with all these things. But the most important things to actually follow are the most difficult things to follow. Like, one level more difficult is that one should have a seat that's neither too high nor too low. How do you know what's too high or too low? You have to actually use your own brain. And then you might have to take a class on how to use your own brain. A lot of people will struggle with these kind of instructions if they don't have someone right next to them who can tell them, oh, no, this is actually not high enough, and so on. One example, I just have to share it. I know it's not relevant to everyone, but I was in judo class the past few days. We were doing a very graceful, difficult, it's just a foot sweep. It's a very simple, standard technique, but it's so hard to do right. And I was understanding all the instructions. I wasn't quite getting it until the teacher came right next to me, and he saw exactly what I was doing in detail with my physical body and how it relates to the physical body of my opponent, who is different than the other opponents. Their bodies are all slightly different. So for the guy I was working, he said, no, okay, just put your arm up this way, then down. And then I just followed his instructions explicitly. And then 3 attempts later, the guy was on the ground. And he said, wow, guys, look at Alex. He's doing really good at this. Why? Because I was just following the instructions. And because of how judo is, and yoga is much the same thing, you can't always see how you yourself are doing. You even if it's not a master, you sometimes just can really benefit from a third party, from eyes outside of your own that can see, oh, actually, you're not sitting erect. You feel good, okay, but you're not actually erect. Now go like this. Oh, how does that feel? So, yes. That is good. So for me, how I'm going to follow these instructions is that, well, I've noticed from doing yoga and so many things so long that the erect posture is immensely beneficial. It's something I practice moment to moment every single day while I'm teaching at work, while I'm sitting down here talking with you. My chair is not very good at all. So I have to overcorrect that constantly to keep my spine erect, which I don't like to do, but it's a good practice. But staring steadily at the tip of my nose, I haven't figured out how to do that. As soon as I start to try to do that, I just get really, not dizzy, but my eyes immediately start hurting. So that's not an instruction I will follow. Doesn't mean I will deliberately go against, oh, Krishna's instructions are bad. No, I'm just not ready or able or to follow those instructions. Maybe I'm doing it wrong. I don't know. I don't care. For me, I mean, I would still try to make up for that. So like doing this kind of yoga, I would sit erect in a quiet place on a comfortable seat, make sure it's not too high, not too low. And then instead of focusing on my nose, I would, maybe get close enough to a wall and put like a picture of Krishna on the wall so that in my as much of my field of vision as possible is full of one image of Krishna. So instead of looking at the tip of my nose, I can look at just Krishna. That is still following the instructions. Even though one particular detail I'm deliberately avoiding and not following, I'm doing that so that the higher principled instructions are followed better. And everyone should be doing this in your own way, however is good for you. That's how you're actually being a disciple, being a student, and getting better. You must do it like this. Once again, I don't mean like this, like the exact details I'm doing, but finding whatever it is for you that will actually help you get better to following the most principled instructions. You have to start doing that. In the most extreme sense, for me, that meant leaving rural temple farm ISKCON and going into city life in Korea. That was a big move, which I have no regrets. I think it was the right thing to do. Am I getting an immediate benefit in my spiritual life? No, I wouldn't say so. But I am building up some fruits that will fructify in the future, like a judo black belt, and maybe I can do a yoga teacher training here. That'll be a lot easier to do here than other places. So I'm building these different things that I can take with me so that the next time I do go back to a temple farm community or whatever, I'm in a better position to more benefit better from it. I do kind of miss the devotees, even the bad ones. Now, I did read this verse, okay. But there's a few things in 13 and 14 that were added that are different from the previous verse. So the main thing is we should also be devoid of fear and celibate. The actual word is brahmachari vrate, which means in the vow of celibacy. Vrate and vow are cognates. Pretty sure. Devotion, vote, V-O-T, and devotion comes from V-R-A-T in Sanskrit, vrate. Vow and devotee, those are the same root word for those. And then in the English translation, probably it says completely free from sex life, which is awesome. I mean, as far as translation goes, going from brahmachari vrate in the vow of celibacy to then in English, completely free from sex life, that's such a beautiful translation because it totally bypasses this whole like varnashram system and this and that, which is nice to know. But for the average person who's just reading the Bhagavad Gita, and like maybe they don't know anything about Hindu anything, which was me the first time I read it, this is the best way to translate it, where you really get the core principles of what that word means in Sanskrit, brahmachari vrate, without getting too deep into things that are not at the moment particularly relevant. The main thing is to just be celibate, and it's not taking the vow of celibacy, it's just being celibate, which means being free from sex life. This is just a perfect translation. Be better than perfect, I mean. Okay. So, also one difference between this verse and the last one, specifically what Prabhupada said in the purport last time, that our single point to focus on is chanting the holy names. What Krishna says at the end of verse 14 is just focus on me. That's going to be a recurring theme in the Gita, right? And that's one of these principled instructions that can have many different details of how you do it. And I believe Krishna is using these words precisely and intentionally so that it can allow, so from the Bhagavad Gita, there can allow many different paths, sampradayas, paramparas, whatever, many different ways of matpadaha, of making Krishna the supreme ultimate goal. One of them being our Gaudiya Vaishnava Sri Chaitanya path of kirtan, harinama, many other ways as well. The main principle is just focus on Krishna. Chanting the holy names of the Lord compared to like sitting in a good posture and focusing on Krishna in your heart, it's the same thing. In principle, it's exactly the same thing. In detail, it's slightly different. One, you're moving your mouth muscles and making some sound vibrations, and another one, maybe you're silent. And you're in a silent place as well. You can do kirtan in a very loud place, congregationally, and it may not be in a secluded, it could be in a city center. You could be doing it super loud, ravish kirtan in downtown New York, whatever city in the world. And that is in principle the same thing as someone who follows these verse instructions perfectly and explicitly by being totally alone in a secluded and sanctified place and closing your eyes or whatever and just focusing on Krishna within. It's the same thing. It's just worship of Krishna. It's the same thing. It just so happens that in the Kali Yuga, if you want to get to, it's about efficiency, really. The most efficient way to become Krishna consciousness is to chant his holy names. That's just more efficient. You can still find him by reading the Bhagavad Gita and sitting down and following all these instructions. That'll work, but do you have the time to do that? Are you in a place emotionally, financially, and otherwise where you can do this? Most of us are not. So for the average general population, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu descended, and Srila Prabhupada and his Srila Prabhupada and others have descended as well for the general masses to give, what we should do. Another interesting word to note here is samyamya, to be completely subdued. And I wrote down, this could be the same Sanskrit word that Patanjali uses as one of the 8 limbs. There are 5 yamas. Let's see if this is one of the yamas. Nope. It's a good guess. But anyway, we can still, so samyamya, this is a yama from Krishna himself. Now it says on Wikipedia here, the word yama means reining in or control. Actually, this is yamya, so it might actually not be yama. It might be a different word. I might be totally wrong here with my Sanskrit reading. In fact, that is what I think happened. So you can disregard everything I just said about samyamya. Still a cool word. I really still would really like to know what it means. Sam is probably the same sam as samkirtan, samadarshana. Probably just means the same. But yamya, I don't know. Maybe yamya means subdued, and sam is why it's completely subdued. There is a sameness in the subduction, a completeness, because that's also like a way you can translate sam, where everything is complete. When everything is the same with everything else, everything becomes complete. So that's probably where completely comes from in that translation. Oh, and then the purport here is fantastic. It's a long purport too, which is significant. In the beginning, Prabhupada talks us, well, let me read the first sentence. The goal of life is to know Krishna, who is situated within the heart of every living being as Paramatma, the four-handed Vishnu form. The yoga process is practiced in order to discover and see this localized form of Vishnu and not for any other purpose. The localized Vishnu Murti is the plenary representation of Krishna dwelling within one's heart. Unquote. Those are the first three sentences. So I just thought it was so cool that Krishna Paramatma is here being referred to as Vishnu Murti, as a Vishnu Murti, as a deity within. And in the same way we seek darshan of the deity in the temple, all of these different yoga practices are meant for having some darshan with the deity within. I can't disagree with this. And then on the next page, in the next paragraph of the purport, Prabhupada goes deep into celibacy, which once again, if you're just reading it literally, which is what you should be doing, this is Bhagavad Gita as it is. So just as Prabhupada gave it to us literally as it is, we as readers should be reading it as it is, not putting our own mind and interpretations on it. Just follow along. It's not that hard. Just follow along. 13 and 14, these verses, there's only a couple things that are different than the previous verses. So obviously, in the purport, Prabhupada is going to talk about those things that are new, that are being newly introduced here, namely celibacy. So to practice controlling the mind and senses all means the same as avoiding all kinds of sense gratification, of which sex life is the chief. And then Prabhupada quotes the rules of celibacy written by the great sage Yajnavalkya. Quote, the vow of brahmacharya is meant to help one completely abstain from sex indulgence in work, words, and mind at all times, under all circumstances, and in all places, unquote. Now, in that Sanskrit verse, it actually says brahmacharyam instead of brahmachari vrate, but same thing. Basically the same thing. And then Prabhupada talks about how ideally the best way to do this is you start by the age of 5 years old. Children are sent to Gurukul before they have any knowledge of sex life. As while they're still innocent, they're immediately put in a place where they can retain that innocence as long as possible, where the boys stay with the boys. They're completely separated from any potential of sex life, which will be there. I mean, as soon as, even if you're not teaching, even if you're not sexualizing your children, as I was when I was a kid, who's your first crush? Are you going to go to the prom? Even if you're not doing any of that stuff, it's instinctual. It's a biological instinctual process. So simply by seeing another girl when you're 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 years old, whatever, it'll start to bring something up. Even if you're not consciously aware of it, you'll start to get agitated, most likely. So when the boys, simply stay with the boys, and, maybe they have some extra energy built up, they can do some martial arts or whatever. There's many ways that you can just simply dissipate that energy without releasing the seed, without spilling any seed. The guru knows how to simply make use of that extra energy. All right, let's chop some extra firewood, or, there's so many easy, simple things you can do to simply get the focus back on brahmachari life. This kind of reminds me how we're supposed to wake up and Brahma Muhurti, by waking up before the sun wakes up. You have extra potency in whatever you wish to do. Hopefully is chanting the holy names of the Lord, but it could be anything. Literally anything, working out, whatever you want to do, whatever your sadhana is, learning the guitar, whatever it is. When you wake up before the sun, you have a special, potent chance to do a good job of that. And likewise, when you start the path of celibacy, before you even know what sex even is, you have a really good chance of making it, of maintaining celibacy for the lifetime. Same with vegetarianism. If you simply since birth are vegetarian and you're never introduced to meat, and then maybe you leave home and you're 19 years old or something, and someone offers you meat, you go, "Ooh, that's strange. Ew, people eat that? Ew, no thanks." It'll just be so foreign that you'll naturally reject it. As opposed to the exact opposite, which is the situation I was in, and many people probably listening to this, where it's like you're eating meat since birth, practically. So common that the idea of ceasing and desisting that is so strange, and it's so difficult. It's like, how do I do this? And why should I do this? That's not recommended. It's recommended to do the right thing since birth. That is what is recommended. Horrible. And then Prabhupada mentions how as important as it is to be brahmachari, in the bhakti cult, we can also be a householder following strict grihastha rules and still be accepted as a bhakta in our bhakti cult, whether it's this sampradaya or another. That is possible. But in most other yoga schools, jnana school, dhyana school, most other kind of yoga schools, they will not even admit a well-regulated grihastha, because they just know they should understand that being completely free from sex life is a must. That's the most important thing. And then once that is established, then there are different details like, onions and garlic. If you're like completely celibate and you have a little onions once a week, we can deal with you. Most people can easily find a way to tolerate that. But if you're a sex fiend and you're completely free from onions and garlic and you're chanting 16 rounds, but you're a total sex freak, it's like, we shouldn't be happy to accept that person and call them advanced, because they're probably not advanced. Actually advanced, according to the actual subtle spiritual principles, which are not external, which are not material, which we have to use our consciousness and our intelligence very carefully to see correctly. It's not something you can put in a box, put an institution around it with bylaws, and then it all works perfectly. It's not how this works. By definition, you can never do it that way. The institutions that have arisen, like the Gaudiya Math and ISKCON and the Catholic Church and so on, these are making the best of a bad situation. Their founders knew from the very beginning that everything that did happen was going to happen, but it's still better than if there was no institution set up. The net benefit is still greater. Maybe hard to see sometimes, but I think it really is true. So I'm in a constant struggle myself for like what I should do with institutional religions, not just my own, but any of them. Like maybe that really is a sign of advancement to, really even knowing how bad it is and corrupt and whatever, but to just stick with it. That is a direct instruction from Prabhupada, don't leave my house. I'm laughing because it's just like kind of obviously true. But then, for someone like me in my particular position, you look at what's happening, and I can definitely make a good case that at least based on the situation I was in, the decision I made, that was the right thing. But I never had an intention of leaving ISKCON altogether. I just don't think being in ISKCON in the West makes much sense for me. Even if I was doing Krishna West, it's kind of like I don't have really a place in most of the West. I just don't have a place anymore. The most cultures, most subcultures in the West, they don't have a place for me. I'm always on the outside. I'd rather, for me, like being in ISKCON China makes a lot more sense. And I may indeed do that because I know how to talk to those people. I can do preaching there. I can do yoga there. There's so many things I can do with success that, I can't do in America, for instance. And so it seems like maybe it's just the easier if I could say to myself, oh, look how humble I am. I'm tolerating all this nonsense, but I'm not accomplishing anything versus going to some other place and doing the same ISKCON things, but actually getting work done. That's a better sacrifice. Seems to me. Anyway. Also important to note, a devotee automatically refrains from sex life and sense gratification because of superior taste. And only a devotee has information of that taste. A jnani or dhyani, someone who's just doing materialistic yoga, they may have superpowers, but is their taste of their realizations, their advancement, is it so strong that they will automatically refrain from all other things? I don't think so. My own personal experience supports that conclusion as well. And the same thing goes with being fearless, being devoid of fear. That's another new thing mentioned in this verse. Vigatabhi, vigatabhiha. Which is not in the verse. So I'm not sure what Prabhupada is referring to there. Or maybe I'm not. Wait. Yeah, it is in the verse. I was looking at the wrong verses. So in the Sanskrit translation, Vigatapir, Prabhupada translates as devoid of fear. Beautiful, right? In the Sanskrit and English translation, it's exactly the same, devoid of fear. And which is the same as saying fearless, right? Really humid here. Oh my God. So Prabhupada says in the last paragraph of the purport, one cannot be fearless unless one is fully in Krishna consciousness. And this is stated in the Bhagavatam as well. Krishna consciousness is the only basis for fearlessness. And since the ultimate goal of yoga practice is to see the Lord within, a Krishna conscious person is already the best of all yogis. The principles of the yoga system mentioned herein are different from those of the popular so-called yoga societies. And with that, we should go to verse 15. One note here, I skipped through a lot of the purport, but this, I read the whole thing before while I was taking notes for this stream. And this is my favorite purport I've read in a very long time. There's a lot of very practical wisdom in this purport. And the writing is great. I mean, the length of it is great. And everything about this purport is just stunning to me. So I'd recommend anyone listening to just read the whole purport for verse 13 and 14. With that, we move on to verse 15. Thus, practicing control of the body, mind, and activities, the mystic transcendentalist attains to the kingdom of God, and then in brackets, or the abode of Krishna, by cessation of material existence. And in the first sentence, Prabhupada says, the ultimate goal in practicing yoga is now clearly explained. I will now skip to the last sentence of the purport. In other words, perfection of the yoga system is the attainment of freedom from material existence and not some magical jugglery or gymnastic feats to befool innocent people. Oh, I love it when Prabhupada makes me laugh. Now, my notes already are that the verse itself and just the first sentence of the purport should be all we need here. This is one of these review verses. If you've been following along verse by verse from chapter 1 up until now, this should be obvious. This should be review. Now, one interesting word here is the kingdom of God. The Sanskrit is translated as in the spiritual sky, or parentheses, the kingdom of God. But the actual word is mat samstam. So I believe it means my same house. Mat means my, sam, like sama, same, and stam, I believe, is the same word as grihastha, the householder. So stha is like house. Griha is like wife. Wait, no. Yeah, I'm not a Sanskrit scholar, so I shouldn't push myself too much here. What I know for sure is that mat means my. So in these words, Krishna is saying probably something like my kingdom. But it's possible that this means my kingdom, which is actually everywhere. In the sense that the spiritual world is real, and because it's real and eternal, it's actually everywhere. Whereas the illusory material world is temporary, therefore fake, therefore not real, and actually nowhere. So the kingdom of God is actually everywhere. That's what I'm getting from this. Once again, I mean, I'm really reaching here. I'm not this isn't Vedanta. This is something else. Oh, another interesting direct quote from this purport is, there is no void anywhere within the creation of the Lord. And Prabhupada is referring to the voidists. Does cessation of material existence entail one enters into the void? That's only a myth, Prabhupada says. There is no void anywhere within the creation of the Lord. And then he talks about the spiritual sky. So that is an indication to me that my, translation of my literal translation could be accurate. That the spiritual sky literally means Krishna's home, which is everywhere. Which is everywhere that is real and nowhere that is not real. Yeah, Prabhupada says here, the kingdom of God is everywhere, but the spiritual sky and the planets thereof are called Param Dham, or the superior dhams, the super places, the superior abodes. Well, that's all the notes I took, but maybe there's some more in the purport here. It's a pretty long purport for how small the verse is. The spiritual kingdom and those planets are self-illumined. They're not like our planet, which requires a sun and a moon. Ah, yes. In the Brahma Samhita, it is clearly stated, Goloka eva nivastya akilatma bhutaha. The Lord, although residing always in his abode called Goloka, is the all-pervading Brahman and the localized Paramatma as well, by dint of his superior spiritual energies. So no one can enter these superior abodes until and unless they understand the Lord and his plenary expansion Vishnu. One can overcome, in the Vedas we learn, Tameva viditvatim rityumiti. One can overcome the path of birth and death only by understanding the Supreme Personality of Godhead Krishna. In other words, perfection of the yoga system is the attainment of freedom from material existence and not some magical jugglery or gymnastic feats to befool innocent people. One more time, verse 15. Thus, practicing control of the body, mind, and activities, the mystic transcendentalist attains to the kingdom of God, the abode of Krishna, by cessation of material existence. All right, we'll see you next time with verse 16. Hope you all have a good day. Sorry if that was too long. Haribol. Jai Srila Prabhupada.